Hey everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to my patch 8.9 rundown for League of Legends. This is going to be kind of the first patch of mid-season. From what I've seen posted online, mid-season is kind of over 8.9, 8.10, and 8.11. The general goals of mid-season are more champions can carry in more roles, if that makes sense. The big ticket is going to be seeing if non-marksman teams can be viable, while still having marksmen be viable, of course. And so this is step one of that, which is big changes to mages. Interestingly, this makes their early games better, but the late games not quite as good. It makes them a little bit less level reliant. It affects some mage items. There's a bunch of individual champion changes, and also there's some pretty big changes to Rift Herald and Baron. The Rift Herald changes should make it a stronger turret killer when you get it, or if you get it. And Baron, their goals, from what they stated, from what I understood, unless I'm remembering wrong or reading wrong, is that teams without a tank should have an easier time killing Baron. That might be true, but the numbers posted in the patch notes don't seem to back that up. Anyway, welcome to patch 1 of the mid-season update. This will not be the MSI patch 8.8, which is live as of the recording of this video, but will no longer be live when you watch this, most likely. 8.8 is MSI. We are now on the beginning of mid-season here with 8.9. Let's start actually talking about the change. Okay, first up, Mage changes. And they say they have 2 mana states, one pre-purchase and one post-purchase. And so they're constrained, and then they're not constrained anymore, and they're hoping that they can soften this up pretty much, basically. And they're saying that by the end game, with a bit more attention needing to be paid to mana, they're going to pump a little bit more power into AP in and of itself. Okay, great. So they've made some updates to Doran's Ring. The base MP5, which was 50% of whatever your MP5 was, is now just a flat 5. Which is a buff or a nerf depending, and we'll get into that in a minute. It no longer returns mana on kill, but it gives you 5 damage on hit for auto attacks. So less hitting minions is easier, which always feels good, of course. But theoretically, mana regen is up or down. Well, here's the math. So 6 MP5 was like the standard mana regen for a mage in the mid lane in the previous patch, in 8.8. Some had a little bit more, but 6 was a very, very common baseline. So what happened is every champion got 2 more, well, I should say 1/3, okay, I'll start over. All of the conventional mages that play mid lane got 33% more base MP5, which for most of them meant 2 more base MP5. So I'm comparing 8.8 with Doran's Ring to 8.9 with Doran's Ring because, duh, we're talking about the state of the game after the patch. And so if you don't use the on minion kill bonus mana restoration passive, Doran's Ring is an obviously substantially better item. And 14 MP5 is what you got when you hit level 18, basically. That was end game mana regen. And at that point, you probably didn't hold on Doran's Ring anymore anyway, so who cares? But anyway, here's what that is. And basically, this is just kind of scaling up by mana regen. 10.5 MP5 was something like level 12 or so. Okay, 12's probably the high. 11, something like that. So most of the top half of the chart is what actually matters, and then by the end of it, you've probably sold your Doran's Ring. But okay, if you didn't last hit any minions, such as if you're playing support Lux and you buy this second item, here's your mana regen table. Wow, that's a lot more mana regen, considering the base stat buffs. Now, if you last hit minions, first, if you have perfect CS, if you last hit 12 minions every wave, the mana regen at level 1 is identical. So Doran's Ring is still not nerfed. But if you perfectly last hit farther and farther and farther into the game, okay, yes, the base MP5 uptick, that was going to be bigger with old Doran's Ring starts to take over. But here's a nice little column, which is how many minions do you have to actually last hit for this to really be a nerf? Because, again, if perfect CS is it's the same item, then as your mana regen grows by leveling up, what is it really? And realistically, I think in the real world, players get 75% or less of their last hitting. Go to your OPGG profile and look at your last 5 mid lane games and just tell me what your CS per minute is. It's going to be 6.5, which means you're sitting around here. because that was how much you were actually last hitting over the course of the game. We're all going to believe we lasted every minion. We all know that's not true. So take a real look at yourself, look at what your real last hitting is, and then come back to this chart and say, oh, up until the point where I have 9 base MP5, which was several levels into the game, Doran's Ring is buffed for me. So by and large, Doran's Ring, after the base stat changes, is still a pretty good early game item. Your actual mana regen in the early game is basically untouched, and for a lot of us, actually a little bit better. First 2 levels especially, because you have to get pretty much perfect CS for it not to be a straight buff. So, okay. And now, of course, if you went Corrupting Potion instead, you went Dark Seal instead, or you went Doran's Shield instead for whatever reason, you still get to keep the 2 base MP5 that all the mages are getting. And so for a lot of players out there, our mana regen is better. We have more mana regen, and mages have more mana. Now, what's weird is none of these changes affected Jace or Zed or Talon or whatever. So we're going to be in a situation, as we scroll down into the patch notes a little bit later, where mages have more mana in lane now. And again, especially if you are a Dark Seal user, you just have more stats in the first 5 levels. Congratulations, you just have more stats. You can now spam harder, enjoy your early laning phase. Now, of course, more things happen. Let's get into it. Okay, so Doran's Ring scales worse into the late game, is better early. Let's move forward. Lost Chapter costs 200 more gold, but has 50 more AP. That is an up in efficiency, generally speaking, because 15 AP costs more than 200 gold. That said, Lost Chapter was already really efficient and already had the mana regen passive, so now even farther into the game is your free mana regen. And at this point, 1,300 gold is really substantial. That's actually a very, very big investment. It's, I would say, pretty hard for solo queue players that aren't super, we're not talking master tier. I would say it's pretty hard for solo queue players to, have a safe laning phase up until 1,300 gold that didn't get disrupted by ganks or didn't get disrupted by all-ins in the mid lane matchup. And generally speaking, you're going to have a lot more time without Lost Chapter and without maybe potentially having insane mana regen. Maybe. But okay, item is technically better, but getting to the item is going to take a while. So it's efficient up until you finish your Luden's Echo, which is going to happen another 1,300 gold later. So Lost Chapter is, in a way, Lost Chapter builds, I would argue, got nerfed, because getting to Chapter is a big deal. Tier builds also got nerfed. Tier strictly costs 100 more gold now. So again, there's another state where you're not at infinite mana regen. You're not at infinite mana. And in fact, the refund on Tier of the Goddess went down by a meaningful margin. And they're doing a big change where when you gain your 4 or 8 mana on casting a spell or doing a thing with Mana Moon or Archangel Staff or Tear of the Goddess, it keeps your percentage mana the same. So instead of gaining 4 mana, you'll gain 3 mana if you are at 3/4 mana pool. So more nerfs to mana regen, which again, pre-tier, pre-Lost Chapter, your mana regen is buffed. Post-tier or post-Lost Chapter, your mana is arguably a bit worse as we go on to this. Some buffs to Hextech GLP as well. Total cost is the same. That's fine. They're basically adding 100 mana to GLP and adding 100 mana to Luden's Echo to help continue to bridge the gap between those items, Archangel Staff. One thing I want to point out, which again we'll see farther down in the patch notes, everyone's max mana went down by 400 or something at level 18. It's actually pretty substantial how much worse their max mana got. So we'll look at that in a little bit. But hey, the slow got better, the missile speed got better, the overall cast time to get all the missiles out got better. Hextech GLP is probably still going to be a situational item, but it is still underperforming. I know last time that this item got buffed, I was like, okay, this time it's finally going to be viable, and I was kind of wrong. I mean, I think it's still viable in the right situations. I think it's still an item that exists and can do good things, but I don't think it's ever going to be the meta item. But considering, okay, Phoenix Dakota's got 5 AP, that's nice. But I'm going to move on to the other, Luden's Echo and stuff. Little bits of buff here for Luden's Echo, little bits of buff for Twin Shadows, bits of buff for Arm Guard, which is another interesting thing where, once again, physical damage champions get screwed here, where Zed and Jason Talon get to say, oh no, Arm Guard's even cheaper now. Which maybe it was meant to be a compensation because if Lost Chapter comes in slower, but you still need your Seeker's Arm Guard, there's supposed to be some kind of balancing lever there where Lost Chapter getting changed is a nerf, and maybe that's actually true, and to be honest, the playtesters who are actually doing this stuff are better mid laners than I am, and if it really figured out that, yep, actually Caspia loses every matchup to Zed now because tier sucks and Lost Chapter sucks, She needs something to not lose to assassins, and it was let's buff Seeker's Arm Guard. Maybe it works out in the end, right? And that might be true. I am not a good enough mid laner to tell you for sure with my forecasting abilities, but it feels to me, as my limited skill set will allow me to say, that AP mages got buffed overall with this, at least in the early game. That's what it feels like to me. That said, Archangel Staff being weaker because mana pools are smaller, maybe I'm overblowing things, because there is a honestly very substantial difference in mana pools by the end of the game. Small buffs to Spellbinder. This item is still really cool. I think it will always remain a situational item, especially because it's an active item. People will just forget to use it because people forget to use active items a lot. But basically, I would argue it's more efficient in most times. You get 20 AP all the time more instead of on activation. Yes, it's a bit more expensive, but who cares? Move speed higher on activation. Like, this is generally just a stronger item now as a result of these changes, and that's cool. Spellbinder is pretty sweet. I'd like to see this item out there. Straight buffs to Rylai's, which I feel like is kind of weird. I know they're just trying to say, hey, let's just put more AP into the items. Let's make mages have a little bit more damage because their mana pools are going to be shrunk a little bit, and Rylai's tends to be a bit more of a late game, end game sort of item. But I feel like Rylai's is one of the most boring items to give just raw stats to. Whatever, not the end of the world. Doesn't really matter all that much. I like to change to Mage's, though. If you're at 10 stack Dark Seal, now getting it into Mage's gives you the move speed. That feels great. I think this is a very good change, and because Dark Seal is going to be a better starting item due to the base mana regen changes in the game and Doran's Ring in and of itself being weaker, although Doran's Ring plus space stats is about the same before, you'll see more Dark Seal starts and Corrupting Potion starts, and so Mage's is going to be a bit better of an item. Here's Luden's Echo buff, 100 more mana, 100 less gold. Cool. This 100 max mana upgrade, by the way, will not compensate for the fact that champions will have less total mana by the end of the game. But again, it bridges the gap towards Archangel Staff / Seraph's Embrace, so I'm happy with that. I think that's a great thing, and as someone who likes playing champions that typically use Luden's Echo, like Xerath and Ahri, feels good to me. Pretty happy with that. All right, next up is another big change, which is AP damage conversion to turret. So the way the mechanic works, it actually says it right. Well, okay, here. Two big things. So one, the way you deal damage to turrets is either your total attack damage or your base attack damage plus either 50 or now 60% of your ability power. And this is, of course, a pretty substantial buff. The ratio is up 20% or 10 percentage points. Also, because people tend to buy magic penetration as a stat, such as Sork Shoes and Void Staff and Oblivion Orb and things like this. If a basic attack would use AP for its bonus damage to turrets, the whole attack is now converted to magic damage, because then it makes your magic pen do a lot more things, and that's really cool. And so I have a table for that. I said, okay, I just said, you know what, if you had 100 base AD to make the math easy, yes, not every champion has 100 base AD, but whatever. We're going for endgame turret killing status, and we have this graph or this chart, this column on the left saying here's how much bonus ability power you have. If you had 100 exactly base AD, here's how much damage old and new you are dealing, and voila, a solid 3 to 16% damage increase. And 730 AP is like really, really high end out there. Yes, it can get higher. 1000 AP exists on like 6 item Gathering Storm Cassiopeia, but that's the exception, the very, very rare exception. So, okay, cool. It is, a 10%-ish damage buff in a lot of the cases of the game. Of course, the less base AD you have, the more this buff matters. So maybe some of these numbers go higher in the real world. Maybe some of them don't. Keep in mind, any 500 AP champion has level 18 base AD at this point. So, these numbers are all the same, this 15, 60%. But maybe some of the early game stuff, your 35 ability power taps when you're, one item in Doran's Ring plus runes and you throw an attack in there. Okay, it's twice as good. Great. Either way, cool. Mages can siege turrets a bit better. And I actually have some context in this, actually. So I actually talked with one of the game designers who are working on the mid-season update. And, right, because again, in 8.10 and 8.11, there's going to be some more work to try to open up some more of the lane matchups, and maybe Cassiopeia can be a viable bot lane carry and all the stuff that we saw from a while ago. And I think it's really interesting. I'm a bot lane main, and I'm excited to see mages be viable down there. But he said that one of the big things they were doing is they had to test and prove out a lot of hypotheses about the game state, such as, are marksmen really, really mandatory? And if so, why are they? And they discovered that there's 2 hypotheses that they tested out, 2 of them that I'll bring up here. One is, can you win late game team fights without a marksman? That answer is actually yes. Marksmen are not required to win late game team fights. And we know this already if you guys are paying attention, because when you think back to when Jhin was a super, super popular professional play AD carry, and he's still popular, but like was the number one AD carry, Jhin is basically a mage. Jhin is a physical damage mage. He doesn't do any sorts of typical crit scaling. In fact, the guy builds lethality half the time. When his build is Yomu's Ghostblade into Edge of Night into Duskblade, that guy's never killing tanks, and yet was the number one most picked professional AD carry. So we clearly know that we don't need conventional crit marksmen to win team fights, because pros have already played around that before and willingly picked into lethality AD carries and said, nah, we're going to go for utility down here. Yeah, you might have Caitlyn. I don't care. And they were right to think this. So that was hypothesis one. And that ended up being like, oh, yeah, no, you don't need crit marksmen. So that's already true, by the way. You can go play Cassiopeia bot lane. You might need physical damage somewhere, but go play some Darius and you're fine. Hypothesis number two, by the way, was, can you kill turrets without marksmen? And that one ended up actually being somewhat no. Marksmen are just so much better at killing turrets than mages, ergo this buff. And this is the number in which they decided that, yep, that's going to be enough. You no longer have to play Ziggs to kill turrets. This is enough of a buff to where turrets fall fast enough if you're a mage. Maybe it's not enough, but this is what they've kind of tested out so far. And I'm inclined to trust them. Their playtesters are better than me. All right, so I talked about this before. I alluded to it several times. A bunch of champions got more mana regen and more base MP5. And I am honestly fairly upset by this, actually. So what happened is all of these champions, with the exception of exactly Brand, who is special, got 25% more base mana. Just flat out, each one of these numbers is 25% more rounded up, right? 350 would have been 337 or 437.5, it became 438. Everyone got 25% more base mana. Everyone's mana growth was cut in exactly 50%. Oh, look, it became 25, 42 became 21. No one's surprised here. Yep. 31.5 mana growth was not a mathematically optimized number. It was 63 cut in half. And so the designers said, yep, we're going to buff base mana by 25%. Brand's going to get 30%, 33% for some reason. I don't know what that reason was, but he got that. And everyone's going to lose half their mana growth. Okay, great, whatever, sure. Everyone also got 33% more base mana regen. 6 MP5 became 8 MP5. Brand is special. He had 8 MP5 because he was a support, so he got 33% more and just got a ton more stats. Now, to be fair, Brand very frequently duo lanes. And so if the idea is they're trying to make sure base mana pools are good for champions who don't level too well, and they're saying, yes, let's keep giving good base stats to Brand. The problem is, I feel like what happened with Brand is they were like, yeah, at some point they decided to nerf Spell Thief's Edge and then didn't during the patch cycle, and then Brand just kept getting better mana anyway. That's what it feels like to me, is that like he got way more level 1 stats, but they didn't actually nerf his mana regen items. Because not like support Brand builds Luden's Echo. So I don't really know what happened here, but he just got to get better stats than everyone else. And this is why I'm sad about this, is it felt very haphazard and just like, yep, we threw some numbers at it, who cares? Including champions like Twisted Fate, by the way, who their mana growth is already as high as some champions after the nerf, right? 31.5 after the nerf for Cassiopeia. And TF was like, guys, I already had 38 anyway. Now I have 19. Like, I have Tryndamere levels of mana growth. Like, and so, like, TF gets to, like, something stupid like, under 700 max mana. It's like he can cast his rotation twice and then It's like, guys, are you paying attention? So I felt really bad about this. It felt very haphazard. And I'm someone who, like, loves clean numbers. I just, like, it's not OCD because that's not what this is, but I just really have I love numbers being changed and becoming numbers that are very tight and meaningful and whatnot. And that's not what this was, of course. It was just like, here's 30% and here's 25% and here's 50%. Okay, we're done. Because I would have liked the mana pools to like target something and said, yeah, you know what? Mages should cap at 800 mana at level 18, or everyone who has over 1,000 mana caps at 1,000 mana at level 18, right? Like, I would like if Mage just like, every Mage has 350 or 400 at level 1, and they reach 1,000. And we're like, cool, now we can balance mana costs around this. Instead, you have like, well, Talia is a worse Archangel Staff than Syndra because her mana pool is smaller. And it's not because designers balanced Archangel Staff around the champion. They just fiddled with base stats until the champion felt appropriate, but it gives this little bit of extra knock-on effects, such as Archangel Staff is good or less good. Because you have weird things like, and maybe it's fine, right? Like, if your max mana pool is really high, such as Cassiopeia, who has insane mana growth and has like 1,300 max mana at level 18 until this patch. Wow, you have 1,300 max mana. You have so much mana to amplify your AP with Archangel Staff. On the flip side, if you have very little mana, like Twisted Fate, you have very little base mana to flood into Archangel Staff to make free ability power. But that said, your mana pool is so low that a simple Sapphire Crystal is a really big deal in as far as your mana as far as your mana pool growing. So like, okay, there's synergies on both sides and whatnot, but again, to me, it feels like the thing where no one's really studying the numbers, and that's fine. You don't need to. It's not actually that important. This is by far not the most important thing about League of Legends. It just feels bad to me to see systems changed without seeming care. Now, I will say one more thing about this and then move on. It is probably correct from an actual development point of view to do something simple and move on, because you're going to have a lot of the game change around this. Turrets dying faster might make Twisted Fate a much better champion, because Twisted Fate is typically a split-pushing mage, because he has a global to get in or out of split-push duty. He likes to buy Lichbane and blue-card turrets and do damage to these things, and so having a tool to do more damage to turrets, such as the AP ratio to turrets buff, is going to make Twisted Fate a better champion and a better split pusher, whereas someone like Vel'Koz is never going to do that. Vel'Koz is not going to split push turrets down like ever. Veigar might, and so Veigar is going to get buffed, even though his base stat changes are going to be somewhere else compared to other champions. At the end of the day, it's not actually that big of a deal that the base stats were just done with a very broad brush and said, screw it. I just like to see things done with care, and that's not what happened here, and oh well. Honestly, not the end of the world, so we're going to move on. Also, Zyra, by the way, has now infinite mana regen, because again, she got painted with a broad brush of 33% more mana regen at level 1, so she gained 5 MP5. Just cuz. Alright guys, so Zyra and Brand got a crap ton more mana, and Nami didn't. So we're all going to play Mage supports next patch. I'm going to get a bunch of free loot with Zyra with my 3 mana per second at level 1 before Spell Thieves, aka 5 mana per second at level 1. Okay. They also gave the 1/3 more mana regen to these guys. These were champions that did not typically build. They're still Mage mana users. They're champions who would build a Doran's Ring. And this is mostly like Doran's Ring compensation. It seems to be what the base mana regen stuff is about. So they got this, but they didn't typically build like a Luden's Echo or a Lost Chapter, and so they didn't get the base mana changes. Which means Galio gets to, I guess, get his Doran's Ring compensation, or just go Dark Seal and enjoy more mana regen. And, you know, or go Row or whatever. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm not sure exactly what this puts me. Oh, I guess, sorry, Morgana got free mana as well. So Morgana also has insane mana regen. So yeah, Morgana, Zyra, and Brandon are the best supports. Congratulations. They've all been buffed. Okay, now we're going to move on to individual champion changes, part 2. Buffs to Amumu. Amumu is a slightly weak champion, 49% win rate, generally speaking, in high elo solo queue. For me, by the way, the high elo bucket I'm taking is like mid-plat plus. It's like top 2% of players, something like that. It's 2 or 3% of players. I don't know exactly, but like I basically picked somewhere around there. Said, yeah, like top 2% feels pretty fair. So that's the general bucket I'm looking at when I'm quoting these win rate stats. I'm talking about the top 2 or 3% of players, which feels pretty fair from a sample size perspective. And like when the game is being played well, this is what's happening. Now this means I'm not quoting stats from the other ratings, and with a couple exceptions, I will note those. But oh well, let's move on. Anyway, really substantial buffs to Amumu's Bandage Toss mana cost, which is pretty cool. So here's this. Rank 1 of the ability. And I'm assuming you're maxing it first just to make the data table easier to make. Pretty substantial buffs here. I actually looked at a bunch of his win rate data from external sites as well, and there's a reasonably good chance that Qmax first is now his optimal build. Though the stun duration doesn't go up, the cooldown does go down, and the damage goes up by a lot. And not that the mana cost is no longer crazy prohibitive. You got a 50 mana cost cut off of rank 5 of the ability. That's a really, really, really big deal. And at that point, like, yeah, your jungle clears aren't amazing without putting a lot of points into W into E, but so much of your heavy lifting is W doing max health damage anyway, and your Q hitting big camps for damage, which it will as you max it. And so I think Q max is underrated in terms of jungle clear. Definitely underrated in terms of damage output. It's actually a reasonably popular build, but not the most popular build. And now Mumu's going to have like insane nuke power. So I think there's going to be a lot of gain out of this, where Mumu can really, should really consider Qmax and can get a lot out of this. This is not going to be a huge win rate buff to the champion. It's a mana cost thing to a champion who doesn't typically run out of mana that badly because there's a lot of good mana regen in the jungle, but such is what it is. Small nerf to Caitlyn's headshot on minions and monsters in the early game. The way this math works out is up until you get 50% crit chance, it is a nerf. Once you're into late game, it is a buff. Basically, this nerfs her early game shoving power, and her early game turret taking power, and her early game dragon taking power. Up until you're at 2 items, in which case, now it's better than before, because once you finish IE plus Shiv, now you're more powerful. But, okay, sure. I would generally consider this a nerf. Again, this damage change only affects non-champions, turrets and minions and whatnot. Not a really big deal. Her win rate will barely change at all, but she'll be a bit less of a lane bully, which is probably a good thing. Dr. Mundo getting pretty insane health regen changes to his ultimate. Keep in mind, not every champion hits level 16, so this like, oh, 60 became 100 doesn't happen all that often, though of course it will matter. Yes, he will regen his entire health pool now. Congrats, Dr. Mundo. So here's this, and what I did here is I basically took his base HP 5, I took his base health plus his passive, which is I think 0.3% of his max health every second. I stretched those out over 12 seconds, and then I said, okay, and you activate your ultimate, and I used that to do the math here. Because it's how much health does Mundo actually regen over 12 seconds, which feels like a fair thing to say. How much health does he actually regen over 12 seconds? Now, I'm not counting runes, I'm not counting items. Spirit Visage will, of course, flat multiply all of these, but the percentage points wouldn't really change. And you can see here that, yes, it's, of course, very, very substantial. A 20 to 45 to 60% regen bump is a lot. He's going to get a lot more health back over those 12 seconds. Several hundred. This is a really big deal. Dr. Mundo is a barely weak jungler, 49% win rate in general play. And the thing is, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are using like incorrect keystones. Last I checked, Guardian was his best, but I didn't check today or for this patch specifically. He's actually a very weak top laner win rate wise. He's actually sub 48%, but 49% jungler. So this is probably enough to make Mundo a what I'd consider a strong jungler. He already clears really fast. W is an insane tool for that, and he's a pretty good duelist, to be honest. He has really good regen, and cleavers are pretty nuts. So I could see Mundo being like weirdly, and maybe I'm wrong about this, like really good into Olaf, because pre-6 you cleaver chain slow him and you're better at it than he is, kind of. And then at a certain point you duel him and win, but maybe I'm totally barking up the wrong tree with this one. But yeah, Mundo, pretty cool guy. Nice to see him. I will be very afraid as a marksman player because he will never die, but I'll buy Executioner's Calling and, maybe we'll be okay. Really, really big buffs to Garen. Now, Garen, I'm honestly surprised is getting buffed. Garen's win rate goes this way or this way with MMR. The better you are at the game, the worse Garen is. No one's surprised by this, but like Garen is above 50% win rate in every elo below platinum. So for like 95% of all players, Garen is objectively strong. And for 5% of players, he's objectively weak. And Garen's getting buffed, so I don't agree with this happening. I don't think that's the right thing to do, but they chose to. I guess what they're saying, though, is if we're going to give this credibility, is they're probably comparing Garen to other juggernauts like Illaoi and Darius across the same elo bands. It's like, oh no, Garen is just a worse Darius at all elos. Thus, Garen can be buffed. Which, that logic I totally get. If you're like, yeah, you know what? Darius gets to pub stomp in bronze. And so does Garen. That's just how it works. If you learn to counterplay, you'll climb out of bronze. I'm kind of okay with that. Because the counter is be a better player, and I don't know exactly. I'm of two minds about this, and it's one of these videos is not really for me to like drone on about how I feel about game design, so let's move on. The decisive strike damage, though, is a pretty big deal. I want to point out at this point, his best build will certainly be Q max first. It was already a pretty popular build before. Qmax and Emax were very, very similar in popularity. Qmax seemed to tend to win a little bit more. And now with this going on, Qmax is, I think, definitively the best Garen build. Definitively the best Garen build. And so, you get to level 9. This is without having any items at all on the champion. It's a 305 damage nuke. It's also an attack reset and a silence and a move speed buff. It's a pretty good ability. Yes, you must get in melee to do it, but like, Qmax is a ton of mobility. It ups the duration of the move speed buff. It ups the damage of this ability by a lot now. 35 points of damage per rank is a really big deal. Qmax Garen gonna be strong. Maybe not in high diamond, but all of y'all can play some Qmax Garen and do well. This is gonna be strong. Courage resistance bonus will eventually kick in once you're at 60 to 80 CS. So eventually it'll get up there once you're 10 minutes into the game or so. Will be some more durability. That's cool. Garen will be a strong bag of stats with a very strong Q. Aurelia is interesting. I did expect, honestly, to have some nerfs. She's at basically exactly 50% win rate in top lane and high elo. I expect her to still rise a little bit over time as people slowly still learn her a little bit. But, of course, that growth is tapering off. She's been around for a couple of patches now. Either way, according to a 2,700 game sample size in high elo, 38% win rate in the jungle across patch 8.8. So really bad jungler. Really bad jungler. So now that her passive can restack when you attack large monsters, less of a bad jungler. Okay, less of a bad jungler. Will probably still be very weak. I don't expect this to be a huge bump in her win rate, but maybe she'll be less troll, but still bad in the jungle. Ivern getting some very, very big buffs, and honestly, it was weird because for a while I looked at Ivern's stats and I was like, okay, yeah, but if you just run Guardian on Ivern and you run a non-troll Keystone, his win rate is actually still really good. But then Guardian got a bunch of changes and it got arguably weaker and a bunch of other stuff changed around. And so basically, Ivern, even on his best Keystone, is like a 48% win rate champion in high elo. Ivern is objectively weak. I actually like Root Color being more reliable. That skill shot was super narrow, and I'm glad it's a little bit less so. As someone who's going to be hit by Ivern Qs, I'm going to be sad, but I think he deserves this. The health cost being a little bit less on the passive is a nice to have. We've seen health cost changes on the passive before, and they have typically not done a lot to affect his win rate. I had initially thought that it would with some of the old patch rundowns. You can go back and watch them when Ivern got changed, and I thought it was going to be a big deal. It never has ended up being that big of a deal, so I'm going to assume this doesn't mean very much. The big deal is this, though. The maturation time on the passive relic, or the passive like mark, is going down substantially at later levels, and here is this table. From level 7 onwards, it starts to go down faster and faster and faster. First few levels, 7, 8, 9, not a big deal. 10 is only down 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds, and not that much work. Like, first 12 levels, yeah, 11 is shorter than 18, but you still have to leave the camp and come back. It just gives you the chance to, like, mark Scuttle, steal blue, then claim Scuttle when you couldn't have before. Like, there are breakpoints what's going to start mattering around level 12. But when it really matters is 13, 14, and then 15 is the big deal. 14, 15, when it's down to 3 and then 1 second, that's a really, really, really big deal where suddenly you're actually getting through these camps. And now being able to say, channel, mark, consume. Channel, marked, consume. That's really, really, really fast jungling. And suddenly in the end game, Ivern can actually get through his camps. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, he will just straight bash Scuttle Crab really quickly. He's actually probably the best Scuttle clearing jungler in the game now. In late game Baron dances, if it's not contested at all, it's super free. Of course, you can always channel then smite, as you always could in this champion, but really big deal to his end game. Again, the first 6 levels, the clearing is not any faster. Even through level 9, it's barely faster to any, first 10 levels, really, it's like barely different at all. The health cost not that big. So, like, you see this and you're like, oh my god, massive buffs, oh, but like really, like, his end game is better because he deserves it, because what level 18 champion can't one-shot a camp? Like, imagine Master Yi going up to red buff. He'll kill it before Ivern would have finished channeling, regardless of the gestation time. So, either way, glad to see that's happening. Q is probably the bigger, like, material buff to the champion, and again, he could deserve it, so that's cool to see. I'm glad Ivern gets a bit more love. Nerfs to Kai'Sa, because she definitely deserves it. 51.5% win rate in the jungle, 52.7 in bot lane. Huge, huge, huge champion. Really big deal. Very, very, very strong. Totally deserves the nerf. So evolved Q shoots less missiles. Q is always AoE for things like Gunblade and Death's Dance, and also Ravenous Hunter. I'm pretty sure Ravenous Hunter has an AoE condition on it. I would assume so, but I don't know for certain. Either way, Kai'Sa was full healing off Q way too easily on menu wave, so I'm glad that is going down. And being AoE means it's 1/3 as effective in almost every case. So pretty big deal there. As far as the math on evolved Q, what it means for her damage output, if you're to hit a single target with the Q, it is a 14% damage drop courtesy of this nerf. That said, evolving Q is still a 48% damage increase. You're still doing 48% damage more than you did before the evolve to a single target. But for reference, it was a 72% damage increase when it was 12 missiles instead of 6. So evolving is still a big deal. It's still a 1.5x damage modifier. But overall, her Q spike is 14% weaker. Her Q healing is down quite a bit. And her supercharge buff duration is actually down 20% as well. So she's less of a hyper carry. Also, Redance Hurricane Bolts. So, like, these are a lot of small nerfs. And, like, this is something that, like, people are, like, really excited about. And I think it's a good nerf. It is not as big of a deal as people think, though. Like, it matters absolutely. But, like, if this is your only nerf, you'd be like, okay, 0.5% win rate at most. Hurricane Bolts recharging supercharge is a big deal. Her overall, like, I'm super powered is, going down quite a bit. That's a big deal as well. I mean, ultimately, I think these changes together will nerf her like a solid 2%. Maybe more. Like, it's a bunch of pretty small ones, right? Unevolved Q unaffected, Q wave clear mostly unaffected, evolved Q down 14%. Like, that's a less than 0.5% win rate difference in that champion. Like, this healing is less than 0.5% win rate difference in the champion, in my opinion. Supercharge going down by a second is a solid, like, 0.5% win rate delta, and like Rune's Hurricane's not affecting is a solid like when this happened with like Kennen, it was very small. This almost didn't affect his win rate at all. So it's a bunch of individually very small changes. I'm gonna glom it together and say, yeah, 2% win rate down. Maybe I'm wrong by this one. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe it's more. My instinct says maybe slightly less than 2%. Also, Kai'Sa is still a hard to play champion. It's still going to be learned more and more over time. So like, I think she will, by the end of 5.9, unless there's like big meta shifts where she becomes weaker because of other things going on, she will probably remain a above 50% win rate champion is what I'm going to go for here. Kassadin getting buffs to his early Q shield, which is a pretty big deal, up to 60 now at first rank. Kassadin definitely a very weak champion in general play. He's like 47.6% in high elo solo Q. But I think Kassadin is a champion that should probably always sit sub 50. Because Kassadin is an anti-mage. Like, he has a magic damage shield directly on the kit. He should always be weak into Zed and Talon. If he's good into Zed and Talon, something is wrong because he literally can't use part of his kit and is still good. There's something going weird here. And because Kassadin still has games into Zed and Talon because he gets blind picked and they counter him, or Kassadins just don't care and counter pick themselves, that will always deprecate his win rate. A balanced Kassadin will just literally have sub 50 win rate. Now, I'm not saying 56.5 is good, or sorry, 47.5 is the right number for that, and he's getting buffed, which is a good thing. One thing I also want to point out is last time I looked at Kassadin builds, Qmax first was not his optimal build, actually. Emax was a very optimal build. Like, you put maybe 2 or 3 points in a Q early, but you switch to Emax because it's a better team fighting tool, it's a better damage tool, it's a better wave clearing tool. You just had to rely on the fact that you couldn't always cast it all the time. And now that there's less level incentive on the Q, there is even more reason to go for Emax. And that's cool to me. That's exciting to me because I like playing Kassadin. I really, really like the champion. I play him quite a bit. And I will be going for Emax Kassadin now. I will still do my Q poke and stuff, but you shall probably try to go Emax Kassadin from now on as we look through these changes. Will be a nice power up. That's cool. Big changes to Kennen. And what's really good about this, and it's something that I know that they're trying to do, is not only are they bringing back AD Kennen, which is great. I'm happy about that. AD Kennen's a cool champion, I think. But and I love this, they're trying to make sure that when you have the different build, the actual play style is different, right? That AD Kennen his abilities have different power levels than AP Cannon does, right? And you're going to see that in these changes here, okay? So, for example, AP Cannon might ignore W, and so they have a 10 damage W passive, that's the case, with a 0.2 ability power ratio, right? So AP Cannon, if they ignore W, which I'm not saying they will, but if they ignore W, have very, very, very low power W passives, whereas AD Cannon has very high power 100% bonus attack damage, 50 base damage, really high power W passives. And again, with the active as well, right? They're going to invert this. If you play AP Cannon, well, the active damage has a 0.8 AP ratio on it. Wow, that's really, really high. But if you're playing AD Cannon, the base damage is down by 25. So AD Cannon's wave clear goes down, but AP Cannon's burst damage goes up because the ratio is going to cover for it, right? AD Cannon's W mark's going to do more damage. AP Cannon's W mark's going to do less damage. I like that. I think it's really good. Like that's a good direction because it means the champions will feel different, and that's really cool. Okay, so the overall changes into the ability, the base damage on the passive on the 5th auto attack is getting stretched out, weaker than stronger. The AD ratio is going to raise with rank, which is more incentive for AD Cannon to max its ability, of course. But that ratio is going down, which again, going there, right? So cool. The active damage is getting shrunk by 5 to 25, but the ability power ratio going up very substantially by 0.25. Okay, what does this mean as far as the actual numbers are concerned? Let's first start with AP Cannon. So the passive damage, I looked, by the way, at mid lane Cannon's ability order, and by far his most common ability order was W max second, which means you put your second point into it at 8, and you max it out by 13. To make the numbers easy, I assumed your first point came at level 1. I know it's not normally that going to happen, but whatever. All right, so the passive damage is down, and then it does start to uptick around level 10, which of course is quite a bit into the game. And even then, if you have 50, 100, or 150 AP, the damage is still going to be lower than before, which level 11 Cannon doesn't have 50 ability power. So basically, in all cases, AP Cannon's auto attacks are weaker, which that's fine with me. How about AP Cannon's actives? Well, it's down 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 damage. But the ratio is so much better, it requires very little ability power to buff the damage output. You basically spawn at 20 AP. That's like runes and any item in the game. Okay, yeah, you probably start Doran's Blade, so it's not going to actually come in like this for a little while. Sure, yes, I know, math, whatever. But what level 9 Cannon doesn't have 40 ability power? So here we are, right? We've traded places in this case. And what's also cute is, by the way, that these buff numbers are pretty much very much in line with the nerf numbers. So, okay, cool. Anyway, AP Cannon has more W active damage. That's quite nice. All right. What about AD Cannon? Well, as we all know, right here, the active damage is going down. That's not changing because you're not buying ability power in AD Cannon. But here's AD Cannon. And what I did, by the way, because AD Cannon has a different combat pattern, is I took the average damage of 5 auto attacks on a W max AD Cannon before and after. Well, first 2 levels it's weaker, but oh well, it's 2 levels, deal with it. At ranks 3 and 4, it's better, and in fact, because it now has a slightly higher AD ratio, your Doran's Blade plus runes means you do slightly more damage. And then level 5, 6, 7, right, and then by level 9, of course, your average damage is up 3. Keep in mind, the ability does 15 more damage every 5 auto attacks. Cannon basically gained 3 base AD. That's the buff. Cannon gained 3 base AD for WMAX builds. On the overall damage spectrum, that's what happened. Now that said, he also gained an attack damage ratio, right? The attack damage ratio went from 0.6 to 1.0 every 5th auto attack. Now the math on that is essentially consider crit chance, right? So Cannon gained 3 base AD, cool. And if you consider the old W passive AD ratio, it's mathematically the same as 12% crit chance, right? Because your auto attacks do 1.12 times as much damage as they did before. Every 5 autos, you get 0.6 damage. Divided by 5 is 0.12. So basically, Cannon went from having 12% crit chance to having 20% crit chance, because every 5th auto is 1 full extra auto, which is 20% crit chance. So that's how the math worked out, right? Is Cannon basically gained 3 AD and 8% crit chance in other terms. And you know, to look at the math right here, right? If he has 100 bonus attack damage at level 15, His overall 5 auto pattern does 5% more damage than before. Now again, his W active still does 25 less damage. You still have to make up for that somehow. But that's what's happened here. Now, that is, of course, made up for by this. Kennen gains 30, 40, 50, 60, or 70% of bonus attack speed for 4 seconds upon exiting Lightning Rush. Holy moly, that's a really big deal. That is a really big deal. Suddenly, he also has plus base AD, plus base crit. Now he has plus attack speed. And of course, E max seconds seems like a pretty good idea. So this is, of course, a really big deal. I didn't math it out because I don't know how reliably you're going to be able to just like turn off your escape tool to fight people. But if you're going in for the all-in and then you ult them for the stun and then you go into like hyper auto-attack mode, that's pretty cool. And what's nice is like even AP Kennen gets some value out of this. Like AP Kennen goes in, goes ham, and he like says, okay, well, at least do 50 plus 0.2 ability power ratio damage every 2nd auto-attack, 5th auto-attack. That's something. It exists. It's there. I don't think this makes us go Nashor's Tooth on Kennen very often, but like, still cool. Decent chance Rageblade ends up being like a pretty big item on Kennen. I have no idea, by the way, what the typical AD Kennen build is now, if it does include Rageblade. If it does, then these AP ratio changes are going to be even messier in the real world, but I couldn't tell you. Either way, I don't see how this is not a buff to both builds in their divergent paths. And to be fair, Kennen is a 48% win rate top laner, so he could use the help. Next up is Leona. Leona is on the weak side, 47.5% win rate in support. So 20 flat damage on Eclipse, make her early all-ins better. Cool. Aftershock is slightly her best keystone, but Guardian is close. She could use the buffs, happy to see it. Next up, big changes to Lux. And I first want to take a caveat here, take a little sidestep, and say every time Lux has ever received changes, Reddit has lost their goddamn mind saying, but look how OP Lux is going to be. And it's never happened. When Lux first got the ult reset, they said, but look at, oh my, and then she was still sub 50% win rate. And then Lux got the R resets better. And they're like, but she's got, and then nothing happened and she was still sub 50% win rate. Lux has yet to become overpowered from the changes to Lux so far. Reddit, you should be ashamed of yourselves. But they never will be because Reddit are just, Reddit lacks self-awareness. Okay, I think these changes, though, are good design-wise to Lux. I think this is very exciting. I'm very happy about this. Okay, so Lux is getting more attack speed at level 1, but slightly lower attack speed growth. So she's better at triggering her Illuminate passive damage blobs. And I like that a lot. That's really cool. Here's the attack speed growth. 7% faster at the beginning of the game, still 1% faster by the very end. She actually keeps attack speed growth at the end of it all. She's a faster attacker. And of course, I feel like Lux would really like to go precision secondary for things like presence of mind. And so more attack speed into the kit feels good, and she'll be really zippy now. Cool. That's kind of nice. Great. Better at popping those things. Now, of course, her health growth is down, and that puts her at this table right here, where she's finally sub 2,000 health. I was going to say, I don't know why an artillery mage is sub 2,000 health, but then I realized that we gave every mage free health seals, scaling health seals because of runes reforged. But the problem is that now it meant that Lux had more base health at 18 than like Evelynn, who is melee. And yes, they're different champions and Evelynn has tools for this and everything. But like, it feels bad when any ranged champion has more stats than any melee champion. Outside of obvious cases like Scion, who gets free health for a living and doesn't count. But it feels bad. Exceptions can be made for like Ivern versus Thresh, where Ivern's technically melee and Thresh technically ranged, but like outside of the obvious caveats, it always feels bad to me when ranged champions have more than 2,000 max HP. That feels bad. I dislike that, and it's like it's an easy break point. Just keep yourself underneath and just not screw that up on a base stat level. Really not that important. Like Karthus is insane base HP because he's practically melee, and like Karthus is an example where it's like, hey, that's a decent caveat. So again, exceptions can be made. I'm not that mad about it. Glad to see her under 2K, though. Cool. 5% health off at the very end of the game. Not that big of a deal otherwise. But then here comes massive straight buffs to Light Binding. 20 to 0 more damage, 3 to 1 seconds off the cooldown, 10 seconds off the mana cost. Those are huge. Here's the big table of buffs. It's nutty. Now, Lux is typically going to max Q second. What's interesting is I think one of the big things about this change list is it's attempting to buff support Lux, because you'll notice that all these changes, as we look back at this, there's no cooldown scaling and worse damage scaling. there is not much of a reason to max Q second anymore. You can still get 45 damage per rank, but that is the only thing you gain by putting points into Q anymore, is 45 seconds per rank. Now it hits 2 targets and everything else. I understand there's valid stuff going on here, but that is the only thing you gain by ranking up Light Binding anymore. Support Lux might really want to consider maxing W second. In fact, mid lane Lux, especially in certain matchups, might really want to consider maxing W second. Because the Q doesn't really need points anymore. And it makes her less of a burst mage and more of a mid-fight, like, kite, use all my passive procs, you know, like, it makes her a bit more of a battle mage, less of artillery, if Q second gets taken over by other build paths. I think it's cool, but of course, it's like straight buff to Q in all cases. Holy moly, it's massive. That's nuts. It's a nuts buff. Next up, of course, Prismatic Barrier. Instantly shields and sends the thing out on cast. Still rooted for a quarter second, which I think is completely reasonable. Also, if she's alone in mid lane, gets the double shield on the way back all the time, which again, more reasons to consider maxing W second. You'll get that triple shield instead of that double shield more often. And if you're facing a Zed, always getting triple shield is a really big deal for not dying. You pretty much always get to use the entire shield when Zed all-ins you or Talon all-ins you. That seems valuable. So you might see this happen a bit more often. But here's the big change, and this is or should be a pretty big nerf. Okay, so first off, we'll go through the buffs, which is the cost going down as ranks go up and the cooldown goes down as ranks go up. And so here's that. My math is wrong. I'm sorry. This is an old change list. It is not buffed 60 to 100. It is 70 to 110. I apologize for that. That'll be updated in the future. Either way, of course, she's still going to max E first, almost definitely, and is still going to have a nice mana cost clip to it. Of course, it's still 20 mana cheaper, and keep in mind her Q is always 10 mana cheaper, so big mana savings there. Keep in mind that she is also part of those champions who got a bunch more base mana and a bunch more base mana regen, but of course, Luden's Echo versus Lost Chapters, other things is a bit different. But she also got mana cost compensation on top of all this, and so she's going to be in a weird state where her mana costs are going to be probably just insanely good. Of course, cooldown is down quite a bit. That's over here. By level 9, it's now 80% the same cooldown. But the big thing is the missile speed is about 8% slower, and the radius is pretty substantially down. And those are meaningful nerfs. Those are meaningful nerfs to the reliability of E always hitting you in lane. I play a fair bit of mid lane. Lux basically can't miss E. And you could walk back and not take her illumination damage and save yourself the other 90 damage coming through. But E basically always hits. And of course, with E's cooldown and cost going down as you rank it up, that's scary. But what's nice to point out is rank 1 of E has the same cost, same cooldown, and is simply straight weaker. So level 1 Lux is strictly weaker as far as E is concerned. Level 2, I would still consider strictly weaker because of these nerfs. Rank 3, probably still consider strictly weaker. It's around the mid-game when you can actually have the tools to buy boots and trade back with her and other things that it starts to become more manageable to play the lane. So these buffs kind of line up pretty nicely with how the laning phase plays out anyway. And so that's kind of cool. Now, I do want to point out, by the way, that if you land Light Binding, E is a guaranteed hit anyway. You are going to definitely be able to land E off of the Q, no matter what, even though it's slower and everything else. You know, Q, E, R, E is going to happen anyway. But her wave clear is going to be weaker because of the radius. You might, I don't know, you might not be able to hit melees plus casters reliably every time. Maybe you still can. I haven't checked PvE that closely. But that would be a huge deal if you couldn't do that anymore. I mean, that's a huge deal if you can't do that anymore. I mean, really massive. But if that's not the case, it still makes laning against her a little bit easier. End of the day, I think Lux does end up stronger, but not to the degree that Reddit's going to be complaining about. Maybe 1%. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I've been wrong about changes before. 10 armor on Rammus W active. That's nice. Of course, keep in mind this also translates to like 2 damage on hit or something. I forget the exact math on Rammus passive with Ball Curl up. I didn't look it up. I'm sorry about that. It technically does buff his jungle clear some, both in safety and speed. Rammus is slightly weak. He's a 49.6% win rate high elo jungler, so he doesn't need much, but hey, that's nice to see. Next up, changes to Poppy, and I have seen fair bit of complaints on Poppy. About the change list. I don't buy into all of it. I think there's a lot of ado about mostly nothing. So first of all, the 5 move speed, yeah, it exists, but it's like a 1.4% move speed drop. Like, it's not that big of a deal. The range bonus, I think, is just I would say this is a buff to Poppy straight up. In my opinion, it would be a buff to Poppy, just these two changes by themselves, because getting the extra reach for Iron Ambassador, either to last hit or to poke your opponent in lane, I think is actually quite meaningful. This 50 range is quite a lot. This should put her, because I think she's a 150 base attack range champion. Maybe she's 125. But either way, this puts her like pretty close to 500 range, which is now like just standard range champion range, and that's pretty good. These nerfs to W, like, they look big on paper. Oh no, it doesn't scale and it's weaker and my resistances are lower and my, oh no, these are all lower. But like, I did the numbers on it, okay? So here's her durability, counting just her base stats, going from the 15% amp to the 10% amp. And she is between 99 and 98% as durable. So yes, she lost 1% durability, but this is like Poppy lost 1 health per level. She lost like 4 base health, and that was it. It's like, well, you're 1% less durable. Like, instead of this nerf, imagine the nerf was Poppy lost 4 base health. Do you care about 4 base health? Do you care about 4 base health? You don't, do you? You don't actually care about 4 base health. No. Okay, well, that's what this was, right? So, first of all, that, right? 4 base health and like 1 health per level or something, right? Like something pretty small and honestly pretty negligible. So if you don't buy any durability items, it's a 1-2% durability cut, not a big deal. Now, if you buy 100 bonus armor and 100 bonus magic resist, which is pretty far into the game, that's quite a lot of stats to buy. It is a 3% durability cut, and okay, that starts to become a little bit more meaningful, but it's still only a 3% durability cut, and to be fair, again, still does matter, but again, that's like saying she lost 60 health at level 18, which is like 3.5 health per level. If the Poppy nerf were lost 3.5 health per level, you'd be like, well, that's a weird nerf, but like, it's just not that big of a deal. It's kind of weird they chose to do it at all. To be fair, I don't really know why they chose to do such small changes that look bad on paper and yet aren't. I mean, this is a bigger deal, sure. Her like unkillableness at low health. Like, I would have rather they like remove that mechanic than like nerf this. Like, it would have looked better on paper, in my opinion. If like your goal was to make this less obnoxious, whatever. I don't know what the goal exactly was, but whatever. Either way, this movement speed nerf, including the 5 base move speed off, also not that big of a deal. Keep in mind, this is an ability you maxed last. So it was a 1-point wonder for a very long time. And for some reason, I didn't actually include the table. I forgot to snip it. This ends up being a pretty small nerf. It's like a 3% move speed nerf for most of the case. You know, by the end of it all, when it's an 8% or a 10% move speed cut, you go from 1.4x to 1.3x. This becomes, you know, more like a 9 to 10% move speed cut. But going from 340 times 1.3, from 345 times 1.32, it's just not that big of a change because it's the same ability basically until level 14, and then even then it's not that different. So, okay, it makes W more of a 1-point wonder in case you were ever curious that you didn't. Yeah, it's still a 1-point wonder. Look, again, these are nerfs that look bad on paper, and I just aren't that meaningful in the really the grand scheme of things. Still weird to see a bunch of like small on paper nerfs, to be fair, but whatever. Charge range going up is still a pretty big deal. Despite all these movement nerfs going in, you're still going to get to your charge target sooner. So like, in terms of like your ability to charge on someone, which by the way is how almost every Poppy ever actually gets herself into combat, that happens. Yeah, you know, okay, sure. Like, there's some things going on here, and then the big deal is I think this and this stuff here. Okay, so when you actually charge the Poppy R, this is a really big deal that it's 25% faster. 25% faster missile speed is truly a very big deal. It is massive for reliability. This is like, this by itself would be a very, very large buff and would super increase her win rate. I think it would be a noticeable difference in Poppy's power level. Again, they did this weird on paper nerf where they took off 10 base damage to clean up stuff from Runes Reforged. Again, I'm someone who loves clean numbers, and like, maybe I'm being shown why this is stupid. Oh, you cleaned up the numbers, you cleaned up some numbers, you cleaned up some numbers, and it's like, wow, it's a bunch of really stupid looking things on paper, right? It's like, ooh, this just hurts every Poppy main. They're just like trimming power off the kit on a champion that's already weak. Does feel kind of bad, you know? So I get that. But I do think that this being faster and your Snapcast are keeping them targetable are huge power buffs. Huge power buffs. Huge power buffs. That's a really, really big deal. It does mean that Poppy is suddenly much more ult reliant as a champion. And by the way, Poppy has a super long cooldown ultimate. Poppy is a product of the old 2016 Meta Golem era, where everyone went Iceborne Gauntlet, Spirit Visage, Sunfire Cape, and had 30% CDR all the time, plus runes, which meant 40 CDR. And so she had her ultimate balanced around that fact. It's like Ornn ultimate cooldown status, which is like 180 to 100 or something based on rank. Like it's super, super long. That's where she is. Congratulations, you have a long cooldown ultimate. But sorry, but these are real big buffs. These are nerfs. They do matter. There is a power difference here that happens. I will still say on net, Poppy's a stronger champion. Even though this change list looks really painful on paper, and I empathize with empathize with that. This is a huge buff to the ultimate. Poppy definitely was a weak champion, 48% win rate top laner. I assume she will go up in win rate as a result of these changes. I think she will go up in win rate as a result of these changes. This is a big deal. 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 All right. Next up, Shyvana changes. Buffs or changes to AP Shyvana. And like I said before with AD/AP Kennen, the goal of the changes is to make the kits play differently. So AP Shyvana does not have a burnout auto attack incentive anymore. It's gone. Instead, you are playing with resourceless flame blast throws and your Dragon's Descent huge burst damage ultimate, which now makes this a 1.7 AP ratio, big chunk of damage. And there's probably some like residual AoE on the fireball as well that happens with Dragon, and so a bunch of damage comes out. What I'm concerned about though is how degenerate is full AP lane Shyvana, who just throws E's at you that pierce the minion line and just deal damage. Like, I wonder how abusive, truly, Shyvana walks in a lane with a Amplifying Tome and just presses E on cooldown forever. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine. But this is a fully resourceless, no fall-off, no minion blocking AoE damage nuke. This could be degenerate as hell. That said, W and Q have no AP ratios, and she cannot duel you at all, so maybe it's fine. And we'll see what happens. People will try to play AP Shyvana. They will be bad at it. The champion will probably be a bit weak, and Shyvana's win rate will drop as a result of this change. Oh well. Next up, buffs to Sona, which is weird because Sona is definitely already strong as far as win rates are concerned, but she gets 3 AD and 5 damage on Power Chord. I assume Sona is supposed to be allowed to sit at high win rate because she's like the beginner support and not enough people play enchanters, and so enchanters are always allowed to be strong win rate wise or something. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you, but that's my guess. Either way, 3 AD is this as far as her attack damage is concerned, and putting the numbers into Q plus Power Chord damage, she does this much damage. And unless my math is wrong, which I'm pretty sure it's not, a level 1 Q auto, like Power Chord, not kind of the actual Q coming out. Let's say you charged up Q and you just Power Chord somebody. It's a solid 10 damage increase. And it's going to always be a 10 damage increase. Your Q Power Chord with auto does 10 more damage than before because it's 5 times 1.4, which is 7, plus 3 for the base AD. And if you don't have Power Chord, if the Power Chord is not with Q, you take 2 damage off of this because the Q buff is 40% more damage. So, okay. You do 8 or 10 more damage with Power Chords. Okay, and 3 damage otherwise with your auto attacks. So, better poke champion. That's cool. When it'll go up 0.5%, 1%. She'll be really strong. Play Sona. She's OP. At least for solo queue. Next up, buffs to Syndra. Syndra is objectively weak for solo queue. 47% win rate. I am glad to see the buff be you don't stack a bunch of Dark Spheres for your ultimate. You instead are incentivized to actually land skill shots on champions. I don't remember what happened last time we changed this around and changed it from this to that. I assume it was a nerf. Either way, should be a buff. Probably gains 1% win rate because you max Q first. You get this damage pretty early on to be a lane bully. Will still be weak in solo queue. Still gets seen in competitive even before these changes. Like, Cinder already existed somewhat in pro play, so Bjergsen's very happy. Cool. Next up, bug fixes to Talon, where his Q goes farther. Talon was already strong. 51% win rate top, 51.7 mid. He's going to go up like 0.3% off these changes. It's not a really big deal, but it exists. Since a lot of the time you're going for an all-in, you were doing it during ult, which meant you were hella fast and could reach your target anyway. But there is some degree of being able to like really get in there on trades that you couldn't have reached before. And yeah, I mean, 575 is a pretty respectable range for reaching people. So big deal. Yeah, he'll gain some. Warwick, super high win rate champion, even in high elo. Interestingly, his win rate is pretty standard and stagnant across rating. He's good in bronze and diamond, etc. So anyway, 3 attack damage off of his base stats and scaling off of the Q. Talking to the designer who did Warwick, certainly T. He envisioned that Warwick is a good early game champion and just tends to fall off late. This specifically actually amplifies that, which I'm okay with. Keep in mind that Q's damage is 6 to 8% target's max cells plus 1.2 times Warwick's total base AD, total AD, which means the Q scales on its own anyway, and this is not the end of the damage. There is still 1.2 times your total attack damage, which is like 130 or so, which is like 150 attack damage, or 150 Q damage, right? So this has a very large base damage on its own, to keep that in mind. Now, of course, that's nerfed a little bit by the base AD going down by 3, but let's look at numbers. Keep in mind also, Warwick has a passive that deals 10 to, I think it's 44 damage based on level. It's 10 plus 2 per level, so his actual damage dealt is this. It's 4% down at level 1. One thing I probably forgot with his Q math right here is I believe Q applies on hit effects, meaning it would apply his passives 10 to 44 damage as well. That is not included in this right here. But assuming you maxed Q, I think first here, according to the numbers I'm looking at, this looks like it's maxing Q first. I basically used Warwick as the example target, his base stats, and said, how much damage are you losing? And it's up to 10%. And it goes down and down and down over time because the max health scaling does more than the bonus or the total AD scaling, is why it's still decaying down farther and farther over time. But yeah, you can lose a solid like 25 damage off the ability, which is a meaningful difference in your dueling power. It's going to be enough that you probably don't Q max first anymore because 190 is a pretty paltry nuke. It means your healing is down quite a bit, but it means you probably go back to guaranteeing doing W and E max and leaving Q low rank, which is fine. And it's not like Qmax was his best build. It was just a common build. The single most common build was Qmax first. It won't be anymore. He won't lose a lot of win rate here. He'll still be well above 50%, but it's going to be a cut to his damage output. His jungle will be a little bit slower. And keep in mind, by the way, that Warwick is a very auto attack heavy jungler. He has very, very little spell damage. W is an attack speed buff. E does 0 damage, and Q is up sometimes and applies his total AD. So base AD buffs nerf literally every damage tool on the kit. Means more than you might think. Still, 3 AD has typically been a very small nerf to champions in general, so he's not going to move that much. Next up, buffs to Ziggs, and I looked pretty quickly. Emax second has actually been his most common build by a lot. It was interesting, during the Ziggs bot lane hype era, I started seeing a lot more WMax second because you're trying to knock down turrets really quickly. And I still think the WMax second is viable and I think should be a somewhat common skill order, yet isn't right now. But with E gaining 40 damage at max rank, which is a lot, I think you probably never see WMax second again because E second just is going to be such a big power increase. You get so much more out of ranking up the ability. And so here's the damage bump. And it's, again, a solid, like, almost 30% damage bump. You are going to max it second. I don't see why you'd still why you would ever max it over Q. Pretty sure Q is just much more reliable and repeatable. But, yeah, it's a big deal to both his wave clear and his team fight damage. E is, strangely enough, a fairly reliable damage tool because people are going to run over it, and it's going to matter. So pretty big deal here. Ziggs is barely sub 50% win rate, and so he's going to be probably solidly above 50. I looked at his stats. He's a 49.2 at mid lane and 49.7 in bot lane. So Ziggs will be an above 50% win rate bot laner in 8.9. I'm pretty sure Ziggs got those base mana changes from before, and considering that that is a nerf to the end game mana pool, but not to the early game mana pool, Ziggs will be even better compensated as a dual laner. So I think Ziggs gains a lot this patch and will be a strong bot laner. I recommend you play him if you like Ziggs. I like playing him, so I'll probably play him some. I think it's really cool. I like bot lane Ziggs. I think I'm Mastery 5 or 7 on him or something because I like playing the champion a lot. I think I'm Mastery 7 on Ziggs. I'm pretty certain on that. So there you go. They bug fixed Ginsu's Rage Blade, specifically with Jhin. There is some context around why I didn't fix for everything. It's because they don't have really, like, these things aren't coded in an elegant way to make this an easy fix. So they had to do it by hand with Jhin. End of the day, yes, they should probably fix how to properly do multiplicative scaling tools and bucket them properly. That'll happen one day. And it'll be nice when that happens because I like clean numbers. But it didn't happen now. Oh well. Next up, part 3 of the changes. Systems changes to epic monsters like Baron Nashor and the Rift Herald. This is going to be interesting. Okay, so the context is some team comps, like those without tanks, find Baron way too threatening. So they're shifting Baron's damage to distribute it more over the whole party and not just to one target. To make sure Baron is still contestable, we're upping its health, so it takes longer to bring down. Okay, so he's supposed to be less threatening, spread the damage out, but have more health. With Baron requiring more time to kill and spreading its damage around the whole team, opposing teams should have more time to contest and a bigger teamfight advantage if they do. Okay, so his base damage goes down by quite a bit, and here's that table. It's down by, for a Rush Baron, 29%, for an Endgame Baron, 21%. Okay, but still in the 20s% damage gone. The reason this is really weird right down here is because technically Baron's damage actually caps out at 39, and I assume this is linear scaling up to 35 at 40, so there's a weird trough thing going on here, assuming they implemented the numbers the way I thought they did. Assuming they implemented the numbers the way I thought they did. Regardless, whatever. Not that big of a deal. Okay, either way, that's the numbers difference in terms of actual damage dealt. As far as base health, this lies to you slightly because base health is the minute 1 health, but Baron gains health every minute. So his spawned health is actually this. Yeah, 6,400 is actually 10k. Probably should have done that in the actual patch notes, but oh well. So his actual health is up by 36%, right? So he does 29% less damage, but lives 36% longer. Math dictates that Baron now does more total damage over the encounter. I'm pretty sure 0.71 times 1.36 is gonna end up being very close to, if not more total damage. And I didn't do that math because I'm dumb and didn't think of it, but you can yourself and tell me if I'm dumb right now. I'm not gonna do the math and check. Either way, both numbers kind of converge towards the same, and regardless, that's where we are. Okay. Here's the part where I think I'm confused. Baron Corruption used to be an aura. It was 30 plus 5% total attack damage every half second to the target with the lowest corruption stacks. So every half second, someone got tagged with corruption. That's apparently gone. Now it is 120 plus 30% total attack damage on every basic attack and spike attack, which occur every 0.75 seconds. So that's hitting the main target, though. They're adding corruption stacks at a slower cadence to the main target. I'm very confused as how this is doing more overall damage spread out because it's doing damage to the primary target. I'm confused here. Baron Corruption attack is also represented with different visual particles now to make the difference more clear. Okay, that's fine. So again, it's 120 plus every basic attack and spike attack. Baron Corruption is this damage every attack and spike attack, which occurs every 0.75 seconds. The Baron Corruption attack is also represented with different visual particles to make the difference more clear. So are there corruption attacks and non-corruption attacks? Because it doesn't say that. And I'm just very, very confused. this doesn't seem worded the way this would be worded. If you wanted to spread out damage, you would have this aura. So I don't quite get it. But assuming these numbers are what they say, here's the old AD with the old aura, and then the new AD and the new thing. This is damage per second with the old aura, right? 100 damage per second, which was 60 plus 0.1 of the total AD, which starts at 400 or whatever. And the new one is 120 plus 0.3 times the new attack damage every 3/4 of a second, which is like way the hell more damage. Now, maybe I'm missing something, and this was already what the total attack damage was in and of itself, and it was already doing this much damage, but if so, that's not worded very well, and I'm ultimately just very, very confused as to how these things line up. So I'm lost. I'm sure there's people who played PvE who actually know what happened and can tell me if I'm right or wrong, or if the patch notes are wrong or what. Or I'm just like not comprehending things properly, which is totally possible as well. I get things wrong a lot, but I don't see it. Next up, though, things I do understand. Wrinkly brain. Summoned Rift Herald is now insane. Okay, so the damage to self on charge has been lowered by 150. The damage to the turret on charge is now, I don't know, is this better or worse? Who knows? Don't worry, I've done the math. And the damage, if you can knock down the eye, is of course doubled, and that's of course meaningful. So first, here's context on how much health Rift Herald has. Summoned Rift Herald, theoretically, has somewhere between 4,000 and 6,400 health when you summon her. That's a lie, though, because the only way Rift Herald has 4,000 health is if every champion in the game is level 1, which is impossible at a 10-minute Rift Herald in any real game. The only way to have 6,400 max HP is if every champion is level 18 when you summon it, and it is impossible for every champion to be level 18 at 23 minutes. So I chose a number in the middle, which was 5,000 HP, which is a level 8 average champion. That might be too low. I don't care. It's close enough. So here's the table. And so what I did is I assumed, again, a 5,000 max HP Rift Herald. And I said, okay, if Rift Herald is full health or very, very injured, how much self-damage via the charge? And of course, very, very low health Rift Heralds, like at 10-15%, are only taking about half the damage. Now, I want to point out that the 150 base was not that big of a deal. You can see, of course, at like 13%, it was only doubling. The 150 is not that substantial, but is still a difference in damage taken. Keep in mind, by the way, that we look at the eye damage being 20% max HP, with if you're a 5,000 health thing, is 1,000, which now becomes 2,000 damage. So the eye does about 1,000 more damage when it gets popped, and the charge does 150 less. You do the math, gonna die faster. Period. You would have to charge at turrets so many times for that not to be obviously Rift Herald dying faster. So Rift Herald dies faster. Okay, Rift Herald dies faster because of the eye damage. That's fair. What about this charge damage? Oh my god, what are these numbers? Because again, 150 plus 25% current health was this. In fact, a full health 5,000 health Rift Herald only did 1,400 damage in the charge. 1,400 is less than the current minimum. Rift Herald does 1,000,000 damage now. Okay, not literally, it's 1,500, but like, holy moly. And in fact, 1,500 for most health pools, and then, if it's very healthy, the first charge does like 2k. Because 25% of a 5,000, 40%, there we go, brain went AFK. 40% of a 5,000 health Rift Herald is 2,000 damage. And of course, if you're above level 8, if you're on level 10 or something, it's a slightly healthier Rift Herald that charges more damage, which is cool. And keep in mind, by the way, again, that a full health Rift Herald used to do about half a turret's HP. It's going to do about 60% of the turret's HP now. So big chunks of damage going out. Turret's going to fall pretty quickly and hurt the Herald a little bit less as a result. Okay. Turret's going to die really fast. Every charge one I'll always do half the turret's max HP, at least. Holy moly, that's a big deal, which means basically if you don't defend Rift Herald, it will knock down half a turret on the first charge, and then Ziggs will auto W and kill the turret. Ziggs with Herald can kill your inhibitor in about a minute. Seems powerful. So you've got to defend him. There you go. There's the math on Rift Herald. Next up, Unsealed Spellbook is getting reworked. Unsealed Spellbook is getting reworked, okay? No longer can you come into lane with Ignite, Recall, just grab Teleport and show back up. That's not what's going to happen. Instead, the way it works is you pick a dedicated summoner spell that you actually want to keep, and then every few minutes, you put a temporary one into the slot. You say, yeah, you know what? On a 4-minute cooldown, which reduces 15 seconds each time you swap to a summoner spell you haven't swapped to ever before, so the cap on cooldown goes down to like 2.5 or something, which is still pretty frequent, but that's like 150 seconds, which is like standard summoner spell cooldown for like the fast summoner spells. Your normal summoner spells still tick. You can swap summoner spells anywhere on the map, which means you can like come to lane with TP at 6 minutes, grab Ignite, and then go for an all-in. By the way, 6 minutes is around the time you hit level 6 in a solo lane, so if you're Zed or Fizz, you bring TP, then say, I'd like Ignite now, and then all-in someone. That's pretty cool. Or say, hey, I'm Cassiopeia, I need Exhaust. And you can do that. That's kind of cool. Swap cooldown is 4 minutes. I know there was a version. There was a version of this that said, "Oh, you have to go through the entire chain." I think that's gone. That was on PvE at one point for a while. I also think that they removed, although they don't say they removed it, the overall summoner spell cooldown, the like 15 or 10% whatever summoner spell CD, I think that's gone, but that's not explicitly said so here. Again, on PvE, people would know. I didn't check PvE. I guess I didn't do my job very completely, but oh well. Either way, this seems like a very exciting way to play the game where you actually have 3 summoner spells because, again, this cooldown will get to the point where it's roughly the cooldown of a summoner spell. So you have, as a keystone, a rotating 3rd summoner spell. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I also know there was a version of this that put the summoner spell on a cooldown when you swapped it and swapped back. That, again, does not seem to be the case here. Now, to be fair, there have been plenty of times where the patch notes have been inaccurate or out of date or simply misleading. Those have been accidents opposed to on purpose. That could still be the case. There's a lot of times where I've been like, wait a second, I thought this happened, and it still did, but it wasn't in the patch notes. Either way, though, the chances of maybe igniting and exhausting someone could be pretty good. We'll see what happens. Either way, this is exciting to play around with. This should be pretty fun. Looking forward to playing around with this. I'm excited to find the combinations. And of course, again, this is not the MSI patch. Pros will play with it in Summer Split. Next up, a bug fix to Chrysalis. What's funny is Chrysalis was the highest win rate rune in that slot almost all the time. It was optimal on a lot of champions. And there was a bug where it just didn't actually work in combat with champions specifically. So now it works. And keep in mind, mathematically, like the attack damage and ability power were far superior gold-wise to the health that it gave. So Chrysalis is now even more the best rune in the slot, unless the bug like still gave you the attack damage, but it said it didn't or something, and in which case then it's actually a nerf. I doubt that, though. Either way, cool. Chrysalis is a very, very, very strong rune, and it continues the trend of, hey, you should really consider running Resolve secondary in bad lanes. Such as you're playing Kai'Sa or Xayah against Caitlyn with your bad health regen and low armor. Cool. All right, next up. Lots of bug fixes, and most of these are not really gameplay impacting, so I'm going to skip by them. I read through them once before. They didn't seem all that big. New skins, Blood Moon Evelynn, and BMO. Oh, baby. Also, chromas for BMO. Also, chromas for Mecha Zero Scion. That's all pretty cool. Next up, a client feature. You can go and change your own profile picture, whatever you want it to be. That's pretty cool. It's no longer like the champion you played the most recently. Whew, long patch rundown, almost an hour and a half. It's time for the TLDR. 8.9 is the first of many major mid-season patches that are not going to be taking place over the mid-season invitational. No, these are going to be summer split patches. 8.9, 8.10, and 8.11 are going to change what kinds of champions are played in what lanes and change around what is viable in the late game and in the laning phase. This one aims to change a lot about mages and their mana pools. Ultimately, early game Mage mana regen and mana pools are higher for the first roughly 5 levels. Around, depending on the champion, around level 4, 5, or 6, you start to have less max mana than before. Your mana regen is still higher, but your max mana starts going down. This is compensated slightly by the fact that Hextech GLP and Luden's Echo have slightly more max mana on them. However, Tear of the Goddess is weaker, and Lost Chapter comes online later, meaning that you're going to be starved for mana for, generally speaking, the mid-game onwards, is roughly how that math will work out, because you won't get to Lost Chapter, and your tier is weaker. As far as the stat changes, there's a lot of them. We're not going to go through all of them. It doesn't really matter. Mages are also better at killing turrets by about 10%. They do about, in most cases of the game, 10% more damage to turrets than before. Amumu probably wants to Q-max and is going to be a roughly balanced champion. It's not going to change the world. Neither is the Caitlyn nerf, where she's slightly weaker in the early game laning phase and slightly stronger at killing monsters and stuff in the late game. Dr. Mundo gets massive regen changes, will be a very strong jungler, probably still a slightly weak top laner. Garen will become an overpowered top laner outside of Diamond, and you're going to Q-max first. Please Q-max first is the best build. Irelia will become a less troll jungler, though probably still weak, and probably remains a very strong top laner. Ivern is going to care a lot about root color width going up. The passive changes are going to look good on paper, but don't matter all that much until the late game, but it will still matter in his late game jungle clearing, which is going to be nice. Kai'Sa's going to lose about 2% win rate because her Q burst is going to go down 14% once evolved, going to heal a lot less from Death's Dance, and going to be a hyper carry much less with E. This is a very big deal to her hyper carry teamfight power. It's going to push her much more towards being an assassin. Sadly, her assassin power went down. I kind of feel bad that both these got nerfed. I would have liked to see only one of those styles get nerfed and let her go more towards being an assassin than a teamfight hyper carry, but oh well. Kassadin probably is going to go E max now. There's less incentive to max out the Q. AD Kennen definitely got some more power overall with how this worked out. AP Kennen also probably got a lot stronger as well because his W active is going to be doing quite a bit more damage in any reasonable scenario here. Lightning Rush giving attack speed, of course, a big deal for AD Kennen as well. Leona was a bit weak, gets a bit more power, will still be generically weak, but still a good all-in support for punishing things like Sona. Lux gains a lot of attack speed to make popping her passive much easier. Q gets insanely stronger, especially on cooldown. You probably don't want to max Q second anymore. You might want to max W second, which is going to make support Lux less troll by a lot. Support Lux is very weak, but it still gets played a whole bunch. And you might want to W max second on Lux support so that you can shield your teammates because Q has very little level incentive now. E might actually be dodgeable in lane. That's going to be a very big deal and could be a huge power siphon off the champion. Or she can still hit it and it won't matter and she's going to be straight stronger. But I think it's going to be a pretty big deal. You'll actually miss some E's at some point. W on Rammus is a little bit stronger. Wasn't all that weak to begin with. He's going to be fine. Poppy, I think, really gains a ton out of R going faster and the R point blank knockup, allowing for damage to come into the champion. I think it's going to be a really, really big deal. Even though the rest of these abilities are all getting a little bit weaker, I think she will actually gain in win rate, and that ultimate is going to be nuts. It feels bad being very ult-reliant, but such is life. AP Shyvana getting E-Poke. There's a chance E-Max top lane AP Shyvana is going to be abusive. I don't think so, but there's, I guess, a chance. There's also a small chance that things like Gunblade become good on Shyvana because your E damage goes up. I doubt that, but there's always a chance. Sona, already very strong, but going to be a slightly better lane bully. I'm glad she's remaining squishy, by the way, that the counterplay to Sona is just kill her, but she's going to gain some power because she's going to poke better. I don't think she needed it, but she got it anyway. Syndra getting some Q damage when killing champions. Gonna gain a bit of win rate. Was a bit weak. Gonna still see pro play in 8.9 and beyond. Gonna still be a bit weak in solo queue, but oh well. If you want to be a good Syndra player, you're gonna be fine on Syndra. Talon already strong, but getting range in his queue. Gonna remain strong. Probably still won't see pro play. Whatever. Warwick, definitely OP as a jungler across basically everywhere. Gonna lose out some late game damage with the Q. Gonna lose out on some jungle clear speed with the base attack damage nerf. Will remain probably above 52% win rate, but hey, at least it's gonna be at least somewhat of a nerf. Congratulations, Warwick goes down and gets his first real nerf in the history of his post-rework state. Ziggs was pretty much balanced and a reasonably playable bot laner as well. I think will be objectively strong now as a bot laner, courtesy of the base stat changes that he got, as well as his Minefield second being a little bit stronger. I expect Ziggs to be a strong bot laner. I'll be playing him at 8.9. Rageblade Jhin bug fix. Honestly, this is not that big of a deal. Jin's win rate wasn't that high, and getting to Rageblade didn't end up being that insane of a deal. I think it's going to end up raising Jin's win rate because people are going to hop off the Rageblade Jhin train who are bad Jhin players, and then good Jhin players will remain and actually be good at Jhin, and he'll be fine. Because that's what I think. I think Jhin is fine if you're actually good at the champion. Just a lot of people aren't. Baron, I feel like there's something wrong with the patch notes, either by their wording of it, or the context of it, or I am misreading something. I don't know exactly what it is, but either way, Baron is going to live for longer and do less damage. He doesn't seem to be spreading corruption around, despite what this says. Keep in mind that I'm sure I'm missing something math-wise for how his actual attack damage works. Because of his base attack damage going down, there's got to be some degree of his actual damage to champions going down as well. And I'll probably have to do some addendum in the description below or upload it to the Imager archive for what his damage actually looks like in the real world, because something is wrong here that I didn't research properly clearly. Either way, moving on, Rift Herald's going to do a crap ton more damage to turrets. Will be much easier to kill if you defend at all. If you pop the eye at all, Rift Herald is going to die faster. If you never pop the eye, she will take your entire base, though. Unsealed Spellbook looks really cool. Chrysalis is going to be the best rune in the Resolve tree for any damage champion, and I'm pretty sure Resolve Secondary becomes the best secondary path for almost everyone, just like it was in the old Runes and Master system. That's going to do it for me for this patch rundown. Thanks so much for tuning in. You guys are wonderful. I love you, and I will see you for the next one. I will also see you at MSI. I will be casting from the group stage onward. So I'll see you in Berlin and Paris. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.